I'm Mark Rutten, welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding, and today on the 2.4 meter project we are going to finish building our seat structure, and in this case it's a floating panel that our seat needs to sort of key into. Now this panel needs to be lightweight, needs to allow drainage, needs to be easily removable, and should allow for some adjustment fore and aft for the position of the seat. So let's get right into it. You sit back and I'll take care of the work. Okay. All right, my goal is to create this panel that the seat is going to key into. And I've got some fairly light ply here. This is like, is it a 1/4 inch or? Yeah, it's a 1/4 inch. I need it to be heavier than that, but what I'm going to do is add cleats to it, I think, that will raise it up and allow any moisture that gets underneath to evaporate easily. And our little seat frame has got to key into it, so we'll be cutting some slots into it that the seat will key into in several positions. All right, so I've given myself just sort of a center line here. We'll build off of that. And I've got the pattern from doing our deadwood before, so I'm going to basically use that to reproduce this. So I need to actually end up trimming it a little shorter than the original deadwood because there's a bulkhead that comes in here and a mast step that sits over here. But we'll sort of make it full length to start with, and then we'll figure out how much to trim it back and how to trim it back. I need some thumbtacks to hold this in place. Okay, we'll just start by dropping a couple of thumbtacks on the center line. So I've got my deadwood here, but I've already figured out I probably need to come about a 1/2 inch wider. If I look at how my deadwood terminated in the actual boat, we had a little bit of a lip around the edge. This is going to be raised up. I'm just guessing. I'm guessing that a 1/2 inch more is the way to go. So I'm just going to take my rule here and just use it as a standoff. And I think what we're going to do is we'll cut one side off on the bandsaw and then just flip it over and use it to mark the other side. I think that'll work pretty good. I'm not messing around with trying to run battens around both sides. Okay, finishing nails. I'm just using a light batten. It's not super critical exactly how fair this is. Come on. As long as it's sort of a smooth shape, it'll be fine. Okay, there we go. That looks good. I think the one thing I'll do is take my dividers and swing an arc over to the opposing side here just to make sure I'm locating our scrap at the right spot, because I won't have the center line to work off of exactly. There we go. Now to figure out exactly where I want to put my slots, let's give ourselves a forward arrow here. See, it looks a bit symmetrical. And I know my customer needs a little bit of space back here for a battery. I should probably put the seat on here for a second. All right, so let's see. I think we'll say, because we got to fit a battery right back here. So let's say we're going to lose 2.5 inches, I think, to make room for that battery. So this back end, we'll trim that off. And now maybe we'll start our slots at 1.5. So I'm just going to mark the back edge of my cleat here, and then we'll make a jig that will align both of these, and we can move it forward. Okay, so there's good. That's good. All right, let's build a rotor jig now. Okay, we're gonna build a jig here for cutting some slots, and I gotta admit that I build jigs differently all the time. So we're just gonna try it this way. And so what I've done is I've got some scrap here that is gonna represent my tenon, and I've made it a little oversized by about 1/16 of an inch. I don't want a tight fit on these guys. I want them to be able to just drop in place relatively easily. And I'm gonna make them like just a little over length too by a strong 1/16 of an inch. So this will be a slightly loose fit when we're done. Just compare that to the other one, make sure that we're about the same. That feels about right. Okay, so now I'm just going to chop a couple of these little guys off that are going to be sort of fake tenons. I'll be right back. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I've got the 2 marks that I made just tracing directly off of the seat here. So I've marked to the back edge of both. So what I want to do is I'm going to lay a square across there, just make that a little bit longer, and just going to lay my little stick on there. Ooh, center line, need a center line for these. So let's see, that's 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, so I'm basically, these are essentially 4 inches wide plus a hair. Just make sure I'm marking that on my square. I'll bring it down here. Make sure I've got that same mark right there. Okay. So with my square in position, I'm just going to tack these in place. Just a drop of glue. Come on. Let's go. I see where I screwed up. I wrote thick onto there. I should have wrote medium on. I can't get that one out. Come on. Get off of there. Just a drop. So I want to be able to take these off.
There's a simple hack for a temporary bond where you use masking tape and glue the part to the masking tape. I'm just not used to doing that.
There we go. Now run down here. Ooh, I might have even gone overboard at that drop. See, it's kind of scorching out there. Try and go lighter. There we go. Okay, so that's going to be what our slots are looking like. Now we're going to take a piece of plywood here. And this is, it doesn't really matter what it is. I've got some 1/2 inch. Okay, with the rotor bit you plan to use in your rotor, and I'm going to use a little 1/4 inch down spiral bit, and take a scrap of wood here, and I need to make sort of an offset block, so I need to know the width of my base here. So I'm just going to mark the block right up against that rotor bit, Just rotate it until it's sort of at its most extreme. That way you know you're on the cutter and not on a hollow between. And I'm just going to mark my block here at the edge. Now I'm going to go to the table saw and we're going to rip that down to size. Okay, I'll just check that we've got it right. And that feels good. It feels good when it's at its most extreme. It's just touching the side. And if we end up with a slot that's slightly oversized, it's not a huge deal. So here's the trick. We're going to take this block that we just created. We're going to drop it on one side of our fake tenon. And we'll just take a piece of our plywood here, throw some cyanoacrylate on there, blast our piece of plywood here. Now this plywood is butted up against the edge of my plywood sheet. And check this out. So now I'm gluing this in place to this, butted up against this. Okay, now at this point, we don't want any of this to move, so I'm just going to quickly slide this over to the edge a little bit. I'm going to add a few clamps just to make sure this doesn't go anywhere. It's going to stay there. Do another one down here. I'll throw a couple on at the other end of this sheet just to keep it from moving. Just clamp it right to the table. Of course, if I was smart, I would have clamped all that in place in the first place. So now, with that there, not moving it, we're going to shift this to this side. This clamp obviously has got to move a little bit. Okay, we're going to do this again. And I just made these pieces of plywood just any old random width that felt like it was going to have enough surface area to give me a secure joint. So these are butted up to that, that's butted up to that. Just like so. Now I'm going to get the staple gun going, or the brad nailer, and we're going to pop a few nails in here too, just to make sure it's 100% secure. Okay, that's done. Now, so I need a little bit of this chopped off. What can we do? What can we do? Aha! Handy carpenter's ruler to the rescue. Probably be smart if that is square. I'm trying to do this gently without breaking anything apart. Looks good. Just going to gently slide that out of the way. And I've got a little offcut that needs to go onto there. So let's hope my clamp is not actually in the way there. Okay, good. We're going to do another one across the back, but we'll take care of that in a bit. Okay, we're going to do the same thing down here. It would be smart for me to have like some 1/4 inch shim up here too, because there's a difference in height, and that means this has got to float a little bit. It becomes vulnerable while I'm doing this. This may feel like a lot of screwing around and material used to get just a few slots, but this will allow us to get it done much nicer than otherwise. Sometimes efficiency of action beats out material efficiency. This is really just some leftovers from another job. I mean, that's the nature of building stuff, is you always have scrap that isn't doing anything for you except taking up space. Gently pull that away. Good. Lovely. Okay, so I cut my little spacer block into 2 pieces here. I got one more piece of plywood. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to eyeball where these are sitting, because this is really just a small end stop right there. Okay, good. So now I just need to get my staple gun going and just pop a few staples into here just to tack it in place. All right, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little piece of these same blocks. I cut them down again. I'm just going to add one to each of these guys, and that's just to ensure that we have a spacer that is close to the surface of the wood, because the edge of that router sometimes has a little bit of a taper to the molding on it. I'm just running these flush. Okay, so there's our jig. And what I did here is I added a reference mark. So if we got these lined up, this has these guys referenced right dead smack dab in the center. I probably should have just saved one of these offcuts so that I could space it out here, but it's fine. The important thing is that these two bays are related to each other. How far I move it is totally irrelevant. So I'm going to pick an arbitrary amount. I think we'll say give these, what should we make it, 1.5 inches maybe? So if we got a 1/2 inch, we'll go 1.5 inches. That gives us 1 inch between. So maybe we'll go 1 3/4. There we go. So every 1 3/4. So that gives us 3.5 inches. Another 3.5 inches is a 7-inch range. I'd say that's probably plenty. Okay, there we go. So put that aside for a moment. These guys can come out. And now I just need to sort of lift this up with some scraps. So I'm going to run around, find some scrap to bring this up a little bit so that I don't cut into my table. Oh, I know, blue foam. So what I want to do is I'm just going to run this plywood right out to the edge of the foam here. Drop our jig on. And there's our first position. And what I did not account for was an easy way to clamp it in place, because my materials are different thicknesses, so that makes things a bit tricky. I think we'll go old school. Nothing wrong with old school. Just use a couple of finishing nails out there in the ether where it's going to end up in the scrap pile. Yeah, that's going nowhere. Plunge router. I often wish I had a smaller plunge router. I mean, this is fine. This is great for a lot of my uses. But there's a lot of times where I don't need this much oomph. I should get one that's in between this 3 horsepower jobby and a little laminate trimmer, something like right in the middle would be smart. Always check that you're off before you plug in. And what I'm going to do is I've got a sort of a eyeball of finished depth here, so you can just use your hand pressure to slide your base until you've come past the distance you want to go, lock off that plunge, and then set your depth stop. That's sort of an easy way to deal with it. Oop. I don't know when I last used the router here, but I have bloody well epoxied my depth stop. Wow. Watch out where you leave your router. Somehow I managed to drip epoxy all over this thing, and I've glued my depth stop in place, so I'm going to try and get it released. There we go. I managed to goober that up pretty good. I'm tempted to run a die down this thing, but guaranteed this thing's metric, and I sure don't have metric dies on hand. Now let's see, how many stupid things have I epoxied together by accident? There's the router, I've done the thickness planer, countless utility knives, I've done my washing machine. Drill press. Was it the washing machine or was it clothes dryer? Actually, I think it might have been both. Don't even ask me how I managed to do those. Okay, we're back. There we go. Alright, so there's our depth stop. You only need to come up a little bit below the bottom. Okay, so the idea is that the router drops into these bays, and the sides of the bays control how far the router can go. Right? I've just created this big box. So it's just going to cut this narrow slot all the way around, give us some slightly radiused corner, and then we'll cut them both, and then we'll move this over to the next little stop that we've marked on the side. And then we'll create a whole bunch of series of slots by doing it that way. So I often use like a collet. So I run it on the surface of the plywood material, but I just decided to do this a little differently. I just thought it'd be a fun way to try this, and it's pretty straightforward. So that's what we're doing. So if you watch, I don't try and do it all in one pass. I never try and do router stuff in one pass. I always take my time, do it in several passes. It's easier on the bit. You don't risk breaking the bit. You reduce your risk of tear out. You reduce your risk all around. Routers seem like something that should do a ton of work in a short amount of time, but I think a better way to think of them is they do accurate work in a smaller amount of time. I just want to thank all my followers on Patreon whose monthly pledges help support this channel, but I also want to thank everybody else who watches these videos, who shares them, likes them, and subscribes to the channel. You all help to promote this thing that we're doing, and I really appreciate all of you. So I think that was actually well worth the effort because those results look fantastic. Not as clean on the backside as I would like, but that's the nature of the bit I was using. It was a down spiral bit, which means that everything on the surface is going to look great, but you're going to get some tear out on the backside. I chose to do that as opposed to using an up spiral bit where I'd get tear out on the top. And I suppose I could have used the straight bit too, and I don't know why I didn't use that instead, but I did what I did. Okay, here is our part ready for gluing up. So, got a couple of cleats I made here. There's your basic panel, and here's the seat frame. So it just keys in like so. And we got a whole bunch of positions. Look at that. We got like a full 9-inch range that we can shift that. So if you got a real small person who wants to take up sailing, they can do it. So what I'm going to do is add these little cleats here. So a couple on the outside, and these ones that run the full length. So these really just support the whole length of this little floating board, keeps it elevated. These actually support the outboard ends of that seat frame, because this is what takes the weight, this whole front ledge here. So I want that supported out there. And back here, these things are going to tuck up tight, and so I got these little shoulders there that these will rest on. Although it's going to be the other way around. So this will be the bottom, and then this will sit on the other side. So just going to glue those on, and I'm going to wet out the edges of this with epoxy just so that it varnishes up faster, because the varnish will soak into that end grain really quite a bit, and it'll take a lot more coats to fill those, so it's easier just to hit them with epoxy right now, and that's going to do a much better job of sealing it up. Okay, I'm just going to start with just wetting out these guys, I think. So I made these little cleats out of red cedar. That will be perfectly fine. Not really taking much abuse. Nice and light, nice and stiff. Red cedar is very stiff, despite its lightweight. Not unlike Sitka spruce in a way, although Sitka has a lot more strength to weight ratio. It's like Sitka is very stiff for its weight and very strong for its weight. However, red cedar is also very stiff. It's just got a naturally weaker grain structure, and so it doesn't stand up to the same kind of abuse that spruce would. That said, though, it is amazing stuff. I mean, you can make oars out of it. You just got to be careful you don't make it too thin in any one spot. I use it for kayak paddles all the time. That's my favorite material for a kayak paddle. And I know of people who've made spars for small boats out of it and have it work just fine. And in fact, I discovered something a while back. I was renovating my house, and I had this this contractor helping me, an old fella, and I had some sort of scaffolding set up, and I think I had some some glulam planks I was using for scaffolding, and some Douglas fir planks, and I'm bouncing all over the place on those things, and he comes rolling along with a bunch of rough sawn, 2-inch thick rough sawn red cedar planks. They're like 2x12s, and he said, use these. And I was just amazed at the difference. They were incredibly stiff. You didn't slide around on them when they're wet the way you would on the other species of wood. And of course they're a whole lot easier to manipulate around on the staging we had constructed. So I was really thoroughly impressed with those things, and I've been a bit of a fanboy ever since of using red cedar for all kinds of things that you need to be stiff. So I'm just going to use this as sort of a guide here. There we go. So this is marine plywood I'm using here. It's just 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter. It's Akume, and I use the brand name Jobert, which is it's made in France, or at least the head office is in France. I don't know about if the plywood itself is manufactured there. It wouldn't surprise me if it isn't made in Africa or something. But very nice stuff. If you're reading older textbooks or older magazine articles about building boats, especially from like the 70s, you'll hear people mention Bronzeil plywood, which was it's a Dutch manufacturer, and they're still around. They make all kinds of stuff, make a lot of construction materials and things like that. But there was a time when that was the only really good quality marine plywood you could get in North America that wasn't Douglas fir plywood. And so you'll see a lot of references to getting your hands on Bronzeil. And these days that's not the case. This Jobert is around pretty commonly, and there's Aquatech and Marine Tech, and they're all decent marine plywoods. I added these lightning holes here for no other reason than I could shave a few grams off. I could probably have done a lot more, but there's only so much I wanted to do, because it takes times too, right? I mean, it's not like this is going to be America's Cup racing team here footing the bill. This is one guy who's a very good customer and very patient, but you know, there are limits. There are limits to all customers' tolerance for expense. We need to respect that as builders. And that's one of the reasons you hear me sort of looking at, we'll call it sort of DIY ways of just sort of trying to do things a little more economically, or, you know, using stuff that you have on hand and that sort of thing. It's not that I'm trying to be a cheapskate. It's just that I think it's just worthwhile just to explore ways that you can be a little more frugal in your choices. Something I often forget about for mopping holes: a Q-tip or a pipe cleaner. They're great things to just have on hand in the shop. I mean, even a Q-tip for, you know, when you need to put just the tiniest dab of paint on something. You don't want to mess up a brush or have something, throw away something like an acid brush that, you know, they're not a lot of money, but they're a little bit of money. And it's more about waste, you know, can you reduce waste? This planet can only tolerate so much waste. Using just a little bit of colloidal silica and a little bit of wood flour. Okay. And lastly, these guys. Oh, I forgot to wet those edges out, darn it. Oh well, it'll be alright. Do is you do a rubbed joint, and you gob up your stick and you slide it around just a little bit and try and get full contact. Okay, good. So I'm just going to put some weights on here to hold this in place and call it good, actually. Trying to find spots I can put these where I'm not going to glue them down. There we go. That's the way to do it. Just clean it off. Actually, there's the ticket. There's the ticket. Just right across. Boom. Alright, well here's our floor panel. I've got some cleanup to do still. It's just got all the glue squeezed out. Not much of it, but we'll scrape that up, and got to seal the edges with epoxy, and then after that's done we can varnish it. So it drops down into here, and let's see. not bad. So up here at the forward end, it locates itself fairly well. It's got a little wiggle room. Not sure if I can find a good way to sort of really lock that in. I was going to key it into the keel. May still do that, but that's kind of tricky. And the back end kind of slides around more than I would like. So what I think I'm going to do here is I've got sort of a simple solution. And that is I made up a couple little hardwood cleats here. We'll glue one of them right onto the bottom of the panel, and then the other one will get glued down or screwed down to the floor. I've already varnished this, so I can't really glue it effectively, but I can use a couple small screws. And for something like this, I like the idea of it being removable. That'll locate that nicely, and that'll keep the back end from sliding around sideways, and it'll keep it from sliding backwards, so that's great. Now, I don't really have the room to do that up forward, unfortunately. Maybe I can. I've got to allow for my keel here, though, which is going to drop down into this spot, so I either have to do it after, or I need to cut this away so that the keel can still drop in there. I'm not sure which is the best way to go. There's no perfect solution, unfortunately. I could probably notch the front end so it does key around that mast step. That's a thought. Ooh, tough decision. Tough decision. I hate it when I have to come up with decisions like that. It's so difficult to know which is the better way to go. Let's see, so that works. So if I were to do that, and how much farther forward do we need? Just a 3/8? 3/8 notch? That'd probably work. Let's try that. I think I'm going to try that. 3/8 notch. I hate cutting into this thing now that it's done, you know. So hard to know. But I like the idea of that being a more rigid connection there. And I can round out these corners while I'm at it, I guess, after I've notched it around that. Okay. We'll pull this out and we'll play around with that. And I need to glue my one key in here before I can do the other one, I think. So I guess the next job will be just pulling that out, gluing one of my guys in, and after that's glued in, then I can locate that one for installation. So here's our base, and it just drops in like that. That's nice. Just a little enough play that it's an easy fit. No fumbling. It's never going to seize up. I like that. And I've given it enough room that if a kid wanted to take up sailing, a kid could take up sailing in this thing. So I think that's going to work out pretty good. Alright, let's go make that modification. I'll take this over to the other bandsaw to cut it out. I've got a finer blade on it. Okay, fits okay. It's kind of a loose fit still, even with the key at the bow, but I'm just going to go with it. And I'm just going to use some Titebond 3 for gluing this in here. I don't want to wait half the day for epoxy to kick off so that I can seal the end grain with epoxy. So Titebond 3 is going to kick off, you know, in about an hour's time. I can take the clamp off this and keep going. So I'm just going to make sure I've got enough room for both pieces like that. Good. Some spring clamps. Okay, that's it for this video. It was really satisfying to be able to tick this little project off the list. Now we're going to move on to something else. Now I want to thank everybody out there who helps support these videos, especially those of you who are on Patreon, but also everybody who just likes and subscribes and shares and all that sort of stuff. Making these videos adds at least a minimum of 40 to 50 hours onto my monthly workload. Getting that support is really important for me in order to help compensate for some of that time, but also, you know, it's encouraging to know that people are liking the stuff that I'm doing. I don't make these for the money, but I do really enjoy sharing the knowledge and encouraging people to get out there and get their hands dirty and learn new things and try new things and all that sort of stuff. And recouping a little bit of that time financially is really, really helpful to keep moving this forward and to justify the time that it takes to do it. So for that, I thank all of you, and until next time, we'll catch you later, folks.